He slid a folder across her kitchen table like he was doing her a favor. Inside it, 3 names, 3 families, every single one of them connected to the worst years of her life. He said he could dismantle all of them, said it the way men like him always do, quietly, as if the offer itself were enough. She didn't open the folder. She looked at him and said, "You're late, but if you can keep up, I'll let you help with what comes next." This man collects debts for a living. He has walked into boardrooms and back alleys and made grown men reconsider their entire lives. And she handed him a question he hadn't prepared for. Her name is Naomi. She was 31 when she became a widow. Within days, her in-laws tried to strip her name off everything she and her husband had built. 3 months later, she packed her children into a car and vanished. She was doing something they had not prepared for. Nothing visible. And nothing visible was the only move nobody had mapped. This is the story of what she built in the dark and what it cost every person who bet against her. Before we get to what they took, you need to understand what she had. Naomi was deliberate about everything, her career, her choices, her life. So when she fell for Hyun-woo Lim, a Korean-American architect with a quiet kind of brilliance, it wasn't careless, it was considered, and it was real. They took their time. 3 years before he proposed, 4 before they married. They were building. But from the beginning, there was a temperature in his family's house that never quite warmed. His mother, Mrs. Lim, communicated disapproval through silence, small things, deliberate. The way she addressed invitations, the way she spoke to her grandchildren in Korean, then looked at Naomi just for a half-second before translating. His brother, Tae-sung, was cordial in the way people are cordial when they are waiting. He shook Naomi's hand at family gatherings, remembered her birthday, asked about her work with what looked like interest. But he never asked about their future, only ever about the present, as if he already knew the future was his to decide. Hyun-woo saw it, and every time he stood beside her. He didn't perform loyalty, he practiced it. They had 2 children, a son old enough to understand more than they told him, and a daughter young enough to still believe everything was fine. They bought a home through a family property arrangement. The title sat inside a Lim family holding company for financing reasons. Hyun-woo trusted his family. Naomi trusted Hyun-woo. She signed what the attorneys put in front of her. That trust would cost her everything. Hyun-woo was 41 when the diagnosis came. Healthy enough that doctors double-checked the results. For a while, there were treatment plans, revised odds, careful language. Then the disease turned aggressive. The oncologist stopped talking in years, then stopped talking in months. In his final weeks, he asked her to promise him something. "We won't tell you what it was yet." But she said yes, and she kept it, even when keeping it nearly broke her. Hyun-woo was buried on a Tuesday. By Thursday, at the memorial reception, Mrs. Lim insisted the family still had to host. Tae-sung had a lawyer in the room. Not a phone call, not a letter sent to her attorney out of professional courtesy. A lawyer, at the reception, with documents. The revised will had been signed, allegedly, 6 weeks before Hyun-woo passed, during the period when he was on 2 medications that affected his cognition and could not drive himself to a medical appointment, during the period when Naomi was sleeping 4 hours a night, managing his care, their children, and her job. According to those documents, the operating agreement had been amended. The home they had chosen together, the home where her children had learned to walk, was now listed as a disputed company asset tied to Hyun-woo's estate. Her beneficial interest, carefully erased. The amendment, conveniently timed. Tae-sung presented this with the same cordial handshake he had always used, as if informing Naomi early was a kindness. In Tae-sung's mind, this was not theft. That was what made him dangerous. He had watched his brother choose Naomi, choose her specifically over every expectation the family had carried for him, and he had filed it, quietly, as a debt. Not a personal grievance, a structural one.
In Taesung's architecture of family, what belonged to the Lim name was not transferable. It was inherited. And Hyun-woo had tried to transfer it. Taesung was simply correcting the error. And then Mrs. Lim spoke. In front of the extended family, in front of neighbors, in front of her children's godmother and Hyun-woo's colleagues who had come to pay their respects. Before she said it, her hand moved once to the black handbag in her lap, a small involuntary motion, there and gone so quickly Naomi almost missed it. Later, Naomi would understand what was in that bag, and what it meant that Mrs. Lim had chosen to reach for it and then chosen in the same breath to say what she said instead. Then Mrs. Lim said, "Hyun-woo was always too soft. He built this for his children, not for you." The room went quiet. Naomi stood completely still. She looked at her mother-in-law, this woman she had cooked for, deferred to, shown up for across 11 years, and she said, "You're doing this at his funeral." Not a question, not a plea, a statement, delivered like a verdict. She picked up her daughter, took her son by the hand, and walked out of that room with her back straight. 2 days later, her attorney called. The household reserve account had been frozen, the account tied to the same Lim family holding company that had financed the home. Taesung had petitioned for an estate review within 48 hours of the burial and claimed the account contained disputed company funds. 48 hours. The legal battle, her attorney explained carefully, would take years. It would cost more than she had, and the opposing side had a firm on retainer that had been, her attorney strongly implied, prepared well in advance. She was left with her children, a rental car, a suitcase, and precisely what she had walked into that marriage with. Everything they had built together, gone, on paper, overnight. Now here is what most people would have done: fought, loudly, publicly, immediately. Grief and fury make a combustible combination, and Taesung knew this. He had designed this to be detonated by her reaction, a public outburst, an emotional filing, a war fought on terrain he had already mapped. That was the plan he was baiting her toward. Naomi understood this, so she did not fight, not yet, not there, not on his terms. Instead, she made one call, to a former colleague from her logistics days, someone who had left the industry and wouldn't be on anyone's radar. 3 days later, she had the name of an attorney 2 states away who specialized in quiet estate work. She stopped looking for representation in the city where they had built their life. And she started looking at maps.
You need to understand something about the way this kind of war is fought. It doesn't come at you all at once. It comes in layers, carefully, methodically, each one timed to land just as you're steadying yourself from the last. Taesung had been patient for 11 years. He was not going to rush now. And there was one more thing Naomi did not know yet. Taesung's patience was not entirely his own. Behind his development companies sat private debt, quiet lenders, and one Korean family name that serious people in real estate did not say casually. That name would matter later. For now, it was only a shadow behind the paperwork. Within 6 weeks of the funeral, the invitations stopped, the check-ins slowed. Then came the silence. A woman named Claire, someone Naomi had known for 7 years, someone who had been in her wedding, submitted a written statement to Taesung's legal team. Claire's husband ran a small contracting firm. 60% of his revenue came from one client, a Taesung Lim development project. That contract was up for renewal. 2 weeks before Claire's statement, Taesung's office had called to schedule a routine review of vendor relationships. In her deposition, Naomi described Naomi as emotionally withholding and difficult to reach during the marriage. Naomi didn't call Claire, didn't confront her. She simply updated her understanding of who was in her corner. The list got shorter and more reliable. Then, the Lim family filed for grandparental access rights. The petition was framed as concern that Naomi was isolating her children from their Korean heritage. The petition had nothing to do with heritage.
It was about leverage. It was about inserting a legal mechanism into Naomi's daily life that would require her to report, to appear, to justify. Naomi sat her children down. She told them the truth, age-appropriately, honestly, that there were complicated things happening with their father's family, that it had nothing to do with how much their father had loved them, that they were going to figure it out together. Her son asked if they were going to be okay. She looked at him and said yes. She said it the way she said everything, like she had already thought it through, and the answer was the only one that made sense. He believed her, because she left him no other option. That night, after they were asleep, she sat on the floor of the bathroom with the door closed and the water running, and cried in the way she had not allowed herself to cry since the hospital. Not for the property, not for the attorneys or the frozen account or Claire's statement or any of it. For him, for the specific weight of his hand on her shoulder, for the way he had said her name when he was tired, for the version of the next 30 years she had been building in her head since the day she met him, and which no longer existed. She stayed on that floor until it passed. Then she stood up, washed her face, and went to bed. She did not do that again. 6 weeks after the funeral, she found the letter. Handwritten, dated 2 weeks before Hyun-woo passed. She read it once, set it down on the kitchen table, sat back in her chair. After a long silence, she said, quietly, to no one, "He knew." She folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, put it somewhere deliberate, somewhere she could find it again when the time was right. Then she opened his laptop. Not because the letter told her to, because suddenly, for the first time, she wondered what else Hyun-woo had left where only she would know to look. Whatever he had seen coming, whatever he had not been able to stop, he had left her something. From that evening forward, something shifted. She stopped wasting movement. She stopped reacting with urgency and started responding with a patience that unnerved her own attorney, like a woman who had just remembered something important. She did not open the laptop that night. She sat in the kitchen until the children were asleep. Then she sat a little longer. Then she opened it. 3 months after the funeral, Naomi was gone. Not missing, not in violation of an order. There was no custody ruling, no visitation order, no court directive telling her she could not leave. Her attorney made sure of that before she packed a single bag. She disappeared in the way a person disappears when she has thought it through completely. New city, new school for the children. At work, Naomi used her maiden name professionally. She took a junior position at a mid-sized logistics firm, a role that was by every measure beneath her experience level, deliberately so. She wanted a title that nobody looked at twice, a salary that didn't surface in searches, a desk in a building where no one knew her story. She was not starting over. She was disappearing on purpose. Tae-sung's attorneys tried to serve papers at her last known address, then at her former employer, then through a process server who spent 6 weeks coming up empty. The grand parental access petition stalled in court. It had been filed but not granted. No order existed. And without proper service, without jurisdiction settled, and without Naomi handing them a mistake to exploit, the Lim family could not turn their threat into control. The Lim family had money, they had attorneys, they had leverage and connection, and 11 years of patience. But they had made one critical error. They spent so long watching Naomi as a supporting character in their family's story that they never once considered what she was capable of when no one was watching. In that quiet city, in that unremarkable office, in that life she had deliberately made invisible, she got to work, and for 18 months, nobody knew what she was building.
Here is something nobody tells you about rebuilding. The hardest part isn't starting over. It's that the people who want to destroy you don't stop just because you've moved on. They wait. And while you're building something new, something steady and yours,
They are still out there, still watching, still looking for the door back in. Tae-sung found it. Nearly 2 years after Hyun-woo's death, 18 months after Naomi disappeared, her life looked like this. One significant promotion, a compliance role that matched her skill set but kept her out of executive visibility. She had proven indispensable without becoming visible. The compliance role was deliberate. She had sought it out. When she first arrived in the new city, she had taken a weekend certification course in procurement auditing, the kind of course mid-level managers take to pad their resumes. She told herself it was practical, useful, the kind of skill that would make her employable anywhere. But she knew why she was really learning it. She was learning to see the gaps, the places where money hid inside ordinary paperwork, freight invoices, subcontractor chains, pass-through vendors with names that changed just often enough to matter. She did not become a forensic accountant. She became something more useful, a woman who knew which irregularities were worth handing to a 1. Her son had made the honor roll. Her daughter had found a best friend who came over on Fridays and left on Saturdays. Their apartment was small, but it was theirs, fully theirs, in a way no property with a Lim signature had ever been. She had not forgotten what was coming. She had simply refused to let it be the loudest thing in the room. She allowed herself, for a few weeks, to let that be enough. And then, one morning, a letter arrived through her attorney. Not served at her door, not filed through the courts in the city she had left. Delivered to the local attorney she had retained under a protected mailing address, an attorney the Lim family should not have known existed, meaning someone had found the new legal layer she had built around herself, meaning someone was close enough. The question was how. It took her 4 days to trace it, not to a friend this time, to a vendor file. One of the subcontractors connected to her firm had also done work for a Lim-affiliated development project. A routine background form, a billing address, one careless internal note, nothing dramatic, nothing illegal on its face, just enough for the wrong person to know which thread to pull. Tae-sung had not found Naomi because she had trusted the wrong person. She had found her because systems leak and powerful people know where to listen. That almost made it worse. Claire had been betrayal. This was reach. She spent the following weekend closing it, changed the billing address on file with her local attorney, updated the protected mailing layer through a different firm entirely, one with no subcontractor overlap, documented the vendor connection, and filed it, not as a legal action, as a record. If Tae-sung's people ever tried to use that route again, she would know exactly where it had come from. The exposure was sealed in 72 hours. She did not mention it to anyone. The letter itself was almost elegant in its cruelty. The Lim family was offering a settlement, a number that was, by any honest measure, an insult, a fraction of the property value, a fraction of what the estate dispute had cost her in legal fees alone, and attached to it a list of conditions. She would sign away all future claims to the estate.
She would agree to a structured visitation schedule, supervised, documented, reviewable, that would drag her back into court review again and again for the next 4 years. Every missed date, every school change, every parenting choice could become another filing, another hearing, another opportunity for the Lim family to question her stability. The settlement was a leash. And at the bottom of the letter, a message from Mrs. Lim, delivered through her son's attorney because she did not have the courage to send it directly. Take what we're offering. You were never really one of us. At least leave with something. Naomi read it once, set it face down on her desk. She sat very still. For the first time in 2 years, she let herself imagine losing, not the property, not the case, her children. She saw it specifically. Her son sitting in a waiting room outside a supervised visit, doing homework on his lap because he had learned not to look up when the door opened.
her daughter's hand reaching for her sleeve in a hallway she didn't recognize. A judge reviewing a file that described her as unstable, transient, uncooperative, a mother who had taken her children and run. She saw the version of this story where Tae-sung won, where the legal machinery he had built around her finally closed. She sat with that fear until it had a shape. Then she stood up, not because the fear was gone, because she had named it, and named things don't grow the same way unnamed things do. She got back to work. She had been preparing for this moment since the day she disappeared. She had the documentation. She had the property. She had Hyun-woo's video. What she didn't have was leverage over Tae-sung's debt. That required a different kind of help. She opened her laptop, searched for a name she had been holding in reserve for 6 months, found a business contact number listed on a development holding company based in the city she had left behind. She dialed. A man answered on the second ring. She said, "My name is Naomi. I own a piece of property you've been looking for, and I think we should talk about what Tae-sung Lim owes your family." There was a pause. Then, "I'll be there tomorrow." She hung up. The Lim family was waiting for her to flinch. She had just called in the one person they couldn't afford to have asking questions.
Let's go back to the letter, the one she found in Hyun-woo's files, the one she folded carefully and put somewhere deliberate, the one that made her say, quietly, to no one, he knew. Here's what it said. The diagnosis had come 16 months before he passed. He told Naomi immediately. He told his mother 3 weeks later. In those 3 weeks, something shifted in him. The letter explained it carefully. He wrote that he had always known his family was difficult, rigid, cold, unable to extend warmth where it was not familiar. But he had believed, until his illness, that blood would ultimately mean more than discomfort, that his mother's disapproval of Naomi was a surface tension that would smooth under the weight of real crisis. The diagnosis proved him wrong. His mother's first question, after he told her, was not about his treatment or his odds. It was about the estate, about what provisions he had made, about whether Naomi understood that family assets were meant to stay within the family. She said it kindly. She always said everything kindly. That was when he understood. His mother would not protect Naomi, not because she was cruel, because in her mind, Naomi had never been family, and when he was gone, there would be no one left to argue otherwise. And in the window between those two conversations, in those 3 weeks when only he and Naomi knew, he made a move. Without announcement, without involving the family attorney his mother had used for 30 years, he completed a clean transfer of one piece of property into Naomi's name alone, before any legal declaration of incapacity, before any estate proceeding, and through an independent attorney with no connection to the Lim family. It was a small parcel, commercial adjacent, land on the outer edge of a district that had not yet been developed. At the time of transfer, it was worth enough to matter, but not enough to trigger suspicion. Not enough for Tae-sung to notice it missing from the broader asset picture. Hyun-woo had purchased it years earlier as a long hold, patient money, he called it, the kind of investment that asks nothing of you for a decade and then answers everything. What he could not have known, what no one knew at the time of transfer, was that 18 months after his death, the city would approve a rezoning of that entire district for mixed-use development. That small, quiet parcel of land was now worth nearly 4 times what it had been, and it had never been part of the estate dispute. By the time Tae-sung started moving paper, the parcel was legally Naomi's. Clean chain of title, independent counsel, no Lim family attorney anywhere near it. The letter explained all of it, not in legal language, in his language, careful, precise, architectural in its logic. He wrote about what he had seen in his family, what he knew Tae-sung was capable of, what he feared his mother would permit in her grief. He wrote that he could not guarantee the courts would protect her, he could not guarantee the will would hold, but he could give her something they could never touch, because they would never know to look for it.
At the bottom of the letter, one line: "I'm sorry I waited too long to see it clearly. I hope this gives you time to build something they can't reach." That was the promise he had asked for in his final weeks. Not revenge, not forgiveness, time. He had asked her to take the children, protect his name from becoming poison in their house, and build before she fought. Naomi had kept that letter for over a year before she acted on it. That year, she did 3 things.
First, she had the property and transfer quietly authenticated by an independent legal firm in a city with no connection to the Lim family's network. Every document verified, every signature confirmed, a clean, unimpeachable chain of title. Second, she went back to the laptop. Hyunwoo had recorded it on his laptop, just over 11 minutes. No camera crew, no staging, just a man in a gray sweater sitting at the desk in their home office, speaking directly and clearly about what he wanted for his children, what he wanted for his wife, and what he knew his family intended to do the moment he was gone. It was not a legal document, but it was something a courtroom, and more importantly a judge, would find very difficult to look away from. And then there was the third thing, the thing she had built herself. She had spent 18 months learning exactly where to look, and she had looked. Tae-sung's development company had been careless, not obviously, not in ways that would surface in a routine audit, but Naomi was not a routine auditor. She was a woman with 18 months, a quiet office, and a very particular reason to look carefully. What she found, she documented, methodically, time-stamped, cross-referenced. She had not manufactured a single thing. She had simply paid attention in a way that no one had expected her to. She didn't run from the Lim family. She had been positioned against them for over a year. The settlement letter sitting face down on her desk was not a threat. It was a starting gun. And Naomi was finally ready to move. And then someone knocked on her door. A man named Junso. Before we tell you who Junso is, you need to understand what he isn't. He is not a man who makes threats. He doesn't have to. In certain circles, real estate, private debt, the kind of finance that doesn't get discussed in annual reports, his family name functions the way weather functions. You don't argue with it. You accommodate it. You restructure your plans around it, and you do so quietly, because the alternative is considerably worse. He is the eldest son of a family that built its fortune in ways that are not entirely discussable, and is now, carefully, methodically, converting that fortune into something that can survive in daylight. Legitimate real estate, strategic development, clean paper trails layered over a foundation that is not entirely clean. Junso is the architect of that transition, which makes him, in his own way, the most dangerous kind of man, not the kind who operates in the dark, but the kind who has learned to operate in both. And Tae-sung Lim owed his family a considerable amount of money. This was money, documented, overdue, and already extended twice. There would not be a third extension. Tae-sung had been slow to repay because his development company, the one Naomi had spent 18 months examining, was not as liquid as its filings suggested. Junso's family had begun the quiet work of taking control of the development corridor. That meant identifying every parcel, every easement, every owner who could delay the project by refusing to sell. The geographic survey flagged one small piece of land sitting directly at the center of the corridor, owned cleanly by a woman named Naomi. But when Junso cross-referenced the parcel against Tae-sung's declared asset map, the one Tae-sung had submitted as part of his loan documentation, the parcel was missing. That debt was secured against his development holdings. A missing parcel meant either fraud or oversight. Either way, it required investigation. That is how he confirmed what she had already handed him. She had called first. She had known, from the vendor trail, from Tae-sung's debt structure, from 6 months of holding a name in reserve, exactly who held the leverage she needed.
She had dialed before his survey was complete. He had simply been moving toward the same point from the other direction. When her call came, he already knew the parcel existed. He did not yet know the woman who owned it had been waiting for him to find it. He arrived at her apartment the next evening. He brought no entourage, no visible threat, just himself, composed, well-dressed, carrying the particular stillness of a man who has never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He had a script. He always had a script. But when Naomi opened the door, he understood immediately that his usual approach would not work here. He would explain the development opportunity. He would make an offer on the property, generous enough to feel like a solution, structured enough to feel inevitable. If she was resistant, he had contingencies. He had dealt with resistance before. Naomi opened the door, looked at him for exactly 3 seconds, and said, "I know who you are. I know what Tae-sung owes your family, and I know that property is worth considerably more to you with me as a willing partner than as a legal dispute that delays your timeline by 2 years." Junso did not respond immediately. This was not how the script opened. He studied her the way he studied everything, carefully, without expression. And then he said, "You're not afraid of me." She stepped back from the door, not retreating, making room. "I buried my husband. I raised 2 children alone in a city where I knew no one. I was erased by people who were supposed to be family and spent 2 years building something they couldn't find. You are a man with leverage. I've handled leverage before. Come in if you want to talk. Leave if you came here to perform." He came in. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table where some months later he would slide that folder across to her, and he recalibrated everything he had prepared. It was not what she knew that stopped him. He had dealt with people who knew things before. It was the absence of performance. Every person who had ever sat across from Junseo, every developer, every attorney, every man who owed his family money, had arranged their face for him, had decided before he walked in what they wanted him to see. Naomi had not arranged anything. She had simply looked at him. He could not find the calculation behind her eyes, and that, more than anything she had said at the door, was what made him sit down and listen. He explained the development opportunity, made an offer, generous, structured, inevitable, and waited. Naomi listened to all of it. Then she stood, walked to the door, opened it. "Come back when you've reviewed Tae-sung's financials more carefully," she said. "You'll find some interesting gaps." Junseo stood slowly. He had arrived expecting to acquire an asset. He was leaving with a question he had not prepared for. "What does she know that I don't?" He said, "When should I come back?" She said, "When you're ready to listen." He left. And for the first time in 38 years of negotiations across every room that mattered, Junseo went home and did his homework. Here's what nobody anticipates when they are in the middle of surviving something: that the person who ends up seeing you most clearly is someone you never planned for. Naomi had not made room for that. Junseo came back 4 days later. He didn't call ahead. He arrived at her apartment in the evening, carrying a folder. She let him in. He set the folder on the table, opened it. Inside, printouts, highlighted sections, sticky notes in his own handwriting. "You are right," he said. "There are gaps, vendor payments that don't reconcile, subcontractor chains that loop back on themselves, invoices that reference projects that were never permitted." He looked at her. "You've already documented all of this, haven't you?" It was not a question. She said, "Yes." He sat down. "Show me." And she did. What she had spent 18 months assembling, time-stamped, cross-referenced, authenticated, reframed everything he thought he knew about Tae-sung Lim. His analysts had missed it. His attorneys had missed it. She had found it because she had been looking with a precision no one expected her to possess. When she finished, Junseo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I came here to acquire a property. I'm leaving with something more valuable, a partner who's already 3 moves ahead. She looked at him. "I don't need you to fight my battles," she said. "I've already been fighting them. But if you can keep up, I'll let you help." Junseo smiled. It was a small thing, controlled, but it was real. "I'll keep up," he said. They worked together the way 2 people work together when neither of them fully trusts the other, but both of them respect the other's precision. He brought access to networks, to information channels, to rooms that don't appear on any public record. She brought the case. Authenticated deeds, estate records, vendor trails, and financial irregularities mapped so cleanly that Junseo's own analysts stopped talking halfway through the review. They met twice a week, sometimes 3 times, and in the margins of those meetings, in the silences between strategy and next steps, they talked, not about the case, about the thing underneath the case. Junseo had spent 38 years as his family's instrument, the eldest son, the one who handled things, the one whose personal life had been subordinated, repeatedly and without discussion, to the family's interests. He had never framed it as a sacrifice. It simply was what it was. Until he sat across from a woman who had spent 11 years trying to be accepted by a family that decided before she walked through the door that she never would be. One evening, after a long conversation about his family's expectations for the development deal, expectations that required him to act against his own judgment, Naomi looked at him and said, "You protect people who don't deserve it." He went very quiet. Then, "So did you." Neither of them said anything for a long moment. It was not a romantic moment in the way that phrase is usually meant. It was something more unsettling than that. It was recognition. 2 people scored by families that never learned to give loyalty freely, looking at each other across a kitchen table and understanding, without having to explain it, exactly what the other one had paid. Naomi did not rush toward it. She was not a woman who rushed toward anything. But she stopped keeping him at the precise professional distance she had maintained since the first evening. And he noticed. And he did not press it, which told her something important about him. Before any of it became official, there was one decision left that belonged only to Naomi. Filing meant exposing the property. It meant putting Hyunwoo's video into a system she did not control, a system where Taesung's attorneys could challenge it, question it, try to dismantle the one thing she had kept completely clean. Her attorney asked her twice if she was sure, not because he doubted the case, because he understood what it would cost her to open that door. Junseo was in the room. He said nothing. That silence was the most important thing he had ever given her. He had access and reach, and the kind of leverage that fills rooms. He chose to use none of it. He left the space where her decision belonged completely empty. She looked at the file, then at the drive. Then she said, "File it." No hesitation, no performance, just a woman who had decided.
The legal reckoning came in stages. First, Naomi's attorney filed a formal challenge to the revised will. Not loudly, not as a press moment, as a clean, documented legal action supported by the authenticated transfer deed, Hyunwoo's original estate planning records, and the testimony of the independent notary who had never been contacted by Taesung's team because Taesung's team had not known to look for him. Taesung's attorneys had constructed the fraudulent will carefully, but they had assumed Naomi would be too grief-stricken, too financially depleted, and too isolated to mount a real challenge. They had given her 2 years to prove them wrong. She had used every day of it. Second, Taesung's financial irregularities surfaced, not through Naomi's filing, through a separate channel, a regulatory inquiry, initiated by investigators who had been directed through several intermediary steps to exactly the right documents by sources that could not be traced back to anyone sitting at a kitchen table in a quiet city. Naomi had asked Junseo for one specific thing. She had not asked for destruction or exposure. She had asked him to make sure the right people were looking in the right place. Doing it her way cost him. His family wanted the parcel cleared quickly, the debt resolved quietly, and the development corridor simplified. He had done exactly that. Nothing more. Third, Hyunwoo's video. 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Submitted as a supporting document. No camera crew, no staging, just a man in a gray sweater at the desk in his home office, speaking in the careful, precise way he spoke about everything that mattered to him. The room watched it in full. Tae-sung's lead attorney made a note on his legal pad at the 3-minute mark and did not look up again until it ended. The opposing paralegal, a young woman who had been in the room for 6 hours and shown nothing, looked at the table for the last 4 minutes. Mrs. Lim watched all of it. When the video ended, her attorney leaned toward her and said something quietly. She did not respond. She was looking at the wall above the screen where the video had played, at nothing in particular, with the expression of a woman who had just heard her son's voice for the last time and understood too late exactly what he had been asking of her. Her attorney requested a recess. She did not crumble. She was not that kind of woman. But when the proceedings resumed, something in her posture had changed. Something small and structural, like a wall that has not yet fallen, but will not hold weight anymore. She simply ran out of ground to stand on. The revised will could not be authenticated under scrutiny. The financial investigation into Tae-sung created a legal environment in which contesting the estate further was more exposure than either of them could afford. Tae-sung's attorney requested the continuance first, then a second one. By the third request, even the judge stopped pretending not to understand what was happening. Tae-sung had walked into the process expecting Naomi to defend herself. Instead, he found himself explaining signatures, amendments, vendor payments, and timelines that no longer lined up. For the first time since Hyunwoo's funeral, he was the one answering questions. Piece by piece, without a single dramatic confrontation, without a public statement or a viral moment, the structure they had built to erase Naomi simply stopped holding. And then Naomi received a call from Mrs. Lim's personal attorney. Not Tae-sung's attorney, Mrs. Lim's. The message was short. Mrs. Lim was requesting a private meeting. No legal representatives, no documentation, just the two of them. Naomi held the phone for a long moment after the call ended. She had spent 3 years preparing for the reckoning. She had not prepared for this. Whatever Mrs. Lim wanted to say to her, it was not going to be a concession. It was going to be something else entirely. And somehow, that was harder.
There is a version of this story where Mrs. Lim is simply the villain. It would be simpler, more satisfying, but the truth is rarely that clean. Naomi agreed to the meeting on 2 conditions: her home, her time. Mrs. Lim arrived alone. No attorney, no Tae-sung, no intermediary to soften or translate. Just a 71-year-old woman who had spent 3 years wielding her grief like a weapon, and who arrived at Naomi's door looking, for the first time, like someone who had run out of strength to hold it. She was smaller than Naomi remembered. Not physically, something else. Naomi made tea, not as a gesture of warmth, as a way of giving her hands something to do while she decided how to hold the room. They sat, and Mrs. Lim said, without preamble, without working up to it, as if she had been rehearsing it long enough that any further delay would cost her the ability to say it at all. "He wrote to me, too, before he passed. He asked me to protect you." Naomi thought of the black handbag at the funeral, the way Mrs. Lim's hand had gone to it before she chose cruelty. Naomi did not move. "I couldn't do it," Mrs. Lim continued. "I didn't know how to want to." The room held that sentence for a long moment. 6 words that contained, somehow, the entire architecture of everything that had happened. Not a justification, not a request for forgiveness, a confession. Mrs. Lim had known. She had received her son's letter, before he passed, while he could still have heard her answer. She had read his words, she had understood exactly what he was asking of her, and she had chosen Taesung's version instead. Not because she believed it, because choosing it was easier than becoming the person her son had asked her to be. Naomi looked at her for a long time. There was no triumphant moment here. No satisfaction shaped the way revenge is supposed to feel. There was only a woman across her kitchen table who had failed her son's last request and who had spent 3 years making Naomi pay the cost of that failure. Naomi said, "I know you couldn't do it, and I protected my children anyway. Not because of you, because of him." Mrs. Lim closed her eyes. Naomi stood, walked to the shelf near the window, picked up a small USB drive and set it on the table. "That is his video, the one he recorded before he passed. I submitted it to the court. That copy is yours." Mrs. Lim looked at it but did not pick it up. Her hand moved toward her handbag, then stopped. "Why?" she asked. "Because he loved you," Naomi said. "I protected that, too." She opened the door. Mrs. Lim left. Naomi stood in her kitchen and allowed herself, for the first time in 3 years, to exhale. She had not forgiven, but she had closed the wound. That is not a comfortable ending. It is an honest one.
Most stories about survival end with the moment the danger passes. This one doesn't, because for Naomi, the absence of danger was never the goal. The goal was always what came after. The property deal closed on a Wednesday morning. Naomi sat at that table not as a grieving widow whose inheritance was being negotiated around her, not as a woman being offered terms by people with more leverage, but as a partner, named, documented, with a seat that had been earned through 2 years of work no one had seen coming. Her terms were accepted without significant revision, because by the time she brought them to the table, everyone in that room understood that she had already accounted for every counter-argument they might raise. She had done her homework before they knew they were being studied. Taesung was not in that room. Taesung was, at that point, managing a regulatory investigation into his development company, an inquiry that had begun through proper channels, moved at the pace that proper channels move, and had arrived at conclusions that were, by every measure, entirely of his own making. His name does not appear in the deal-closing documents. Naomi's does. The Grand Parental Access petition, the one filed not out of love but out of leverage, was withdrawn 3 weeks after Taesung's regulatory inquiry became a matter of record. No announcement, no explanation given. It simply disappeared, the way instruments of pressure do when the hand holding them runs out of strength. Months later, Taesung resigned from the company he had spent his adult life positioning himself to control. The resignation was described publicly as voluntary. Everyone who mattered understood it was not. Her children, who had spent 3 years watching their mother turn survival into a life, knew their father through his words, through the video she played for them on the anniversary of his passing, sitting together on the living room floor with the lights low, through the stories she told without bitterness. On the night the deal closed, her son asked her a question she had been waiting for. "Did you do all of this for us?" She thought about it, gave him the honest answer. "At first. Then I did it because it was right. And then, at the end, I did it because I could." He nodded, slowly, like he was understanding something he wouldn't have words for until he was older. Her daughter, sitting beside him, said nothing. But later that night, Naomi found a drawing taped to her bedroom door. 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing front of a house. The house had a door, and the door was open. And eventually, she learned to let other things be heard too. Not every night, not all at once, but enough.
Her daughter, who used to hold Naomi's sleeve whenever a room felt too loud, began sitting through hard conversations with both hands free. And when her son asked if she had ever been scared, not that night, but later, in the way children ask things when they have been thinking about them for a long time, she did not give the clean answer, the certain answer. She said, "Yes, I was scared, and I made a plan anyway." That, perhaps, is the most consequential thing she did. Not the property, not the documentation, not the legal reckoning. The way she held their father's name.
The last time Naomi and Junso sat across from each other, at that same kitchen table, he asked her a question he had been holding for some time. He asked if she regretted not taking the revenge when it had been offered cleanly, when it was right there, when she could have simply said yes and let him dismantle everything in a single motion. She thought about it, genuinely. She gave it the consideration it deserved. Then she said, "Revenge was never the point. Survival was, at first, then stability, then something I could leave them." She looked at him. "Revenge doesn't last. What I built does." He nodded, slowly, the way he nodded when something landed with more weight than he had anticipated. Then, after a moment, quietly, with the particular care of a man who chooses his exposures carefully, "And me? Where do I fit in what you're building?" Naomi looked at him, and for the first time, across every meeting, every strategy session, every carefully managed conversation, something crossed her face that was not composure, something that had no tactical value. For a second, she almost gave him the safe answer, the clean answer, the answer that would keep the wall where it had always been. She said, "You kept up, through all of it. You kept up and you didn't push, and you did exactly what you said you would do." A pause. That counts for something. He held her gaze. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. Some things get built the same way Naomi built everything, quietly, precisely, without announcement, and stronger than anyone standing outside it can see. She didn't disappear because she was defeated. She disappeared because she was reloading. She didn't come back angry. She came back ready. She was widowed at 31, stripped before the funeral flowers had even died, invisible before the year was out. By 34, she had her children, her name on a property deed, a partnership that answered to no one who had ever tried to diminish her, and a man across her kitchen table who had met her at full force and decided to keep up. Nobody gave her any of it. She built it alone, in the dark, without announcement, and stronger than anyone standing outside it can see. If you want more stories like this, every quiet reckoning, every hidden receipt, every moment where someone rebuilt before the world noticed, tell us in the comments below. And if you know someone who was rebuilt from nothing, who loaded in the dark while everyone assumed they were gone, share this with them. They'll know exactly what it means.